When I was growing up, my dad used to keep raising pigeons, and every weekend I would help him as they were put into crates and taken away, and we'd sit and watch as they returned home one by one, even from hundreds of miles away. It was a world of strange clocks, rings, and ramshackle lofts, and a close-knit club who, despite the often fierce competition, would meet up and dance, sing, and celebrate their love of the birds. To me, this kind of thing was utterly normal. But when I mention it to people all these years later, some can't believe that such a world exists. And some literally don't believe me at all. A pigeon wouldn't be able to find its way home, from as far away as France, to a tiny little wooden hut in a small garden in North Yorkshire. Such a thing's impossible, surely. It's only when looking back that I can see how different this world was. How strange it must seem to people on the outside. I also got thinking about its history, its people and its mysteries. How do pigeons find their way home, after all? Join me on this historic and sometimes personal journey into the strange world of pigeon racing. At this pigeon fancier's market in northern Iran, hundreds of birds are bought and sold on a weekly basis, brought in from the major cities of the country, where breeders are eager to buy, swap, and sell. These bazaars are an old tradition, dating back as far as the 4th millennium BC. It's no surprise then that the pigeon is the oldest domesticated bird in the world, and the racing homer, the breed of pigeon used by today's racers, is thought to be descended from the rock dove, its wild and ancient ancestor, who has been found etched into the cuneiform tablets of Mesopotamia, where our forefathers carved dovecots into the rock formations between Uxisar and Gorim, an area known as Pigeon Valley. Here, though, the birds were not employed for racing, but rather for their nutrient-rich manure, which was used to fertilize the region's crops. Even so, the pigeon has long fascinated us, and in those same lands as the weekly markets are held today, they were once associated with the goddess Inanna, the Queen of Heaven. Lead figures of pigeons were found at her shrine in Asher, dating back as far as the 13th century BC, perhaps showing the more gentle side of this dualistic goddess, who may have symbolized both love and war. Even then, it seems, the image of a dove has long had the power to touch our hearts, to suggest in its sun-dappled wing some subtle sensation of peace and tranquility, of the sacred skies and us below. In fact, the domestication of the pigeon is so old that some believe that, due to extensive cross-breeding of feral and domesticated birds, true wild-type pigeons may no longer exist, making tracing the origin of our relationship with them almost impossible. That said, by the time of the New Kingdom of ancient Egypt, pigeons were likely a very common sight around cities such as Amarna, having found their way there from the surrounding fields, where they could find favourable nesting conditions in the stone walls of the ancient city. It is also possible that pigeons were already being used as messengers from this time, their homing ability not going unnoticed by those who lived and worked around them, who may have viewed them as both practical companions and spiritual creatures at the same time. We can see it in the biblical story of Noah, sending out a dove from the ark to convey that the deluge was over by bringing back an olive branch. And even earlier than this, that same flood story can be found in the Epic of Gilgamesh, perhaps the oldest known piece of written literature to exist in the world. And here, once again, a dove is used in its role as a carrier of messages, released from the ark by Utnapishtim at the end of the deluge. Here the dove may represent not only peace, but spirit, something released from its physical shell into a world reborn, only to return and live again. But this is not purely a metaphor either. For another origin of these stories may be rooted in the practices of ancient merchants, who may carry pigeons with them aboard their ships, letting them go to carry a message about their business, their wares for sale, or simply to announce their arrival. However it is that we first became aware of the homing abilities of these marvellous creatures, their use as a carrier of messages and information can be found all over the ancient world. After all, unlike with human messengers, or other methods such as smoke or drums, the pigeon carrier is silent, discreet, and with no short amount of romantic vision, such as seen with the dove of Anacreon, the Greek poet who releases a dove carrying a message for his distant beloved. This romantic image is no accident, as the fact that this small bird may deliver both itself and a message safely, despite the tempests and torrents of sky and predator, has surely made many of us pause and wonder as to the true nature and ability of these birds. Writing in 1792, Samuel Rogers ponders on the pigeon in his work The Pleasures of Memory, asking, led by what chart transports the timid dove, the wreaths of conquest, or the vows of love? What chart, indeed? The mysteries of the carrier pigeon, coupled with its tireless instinct to return home, are found to appear in the records of the Romans, used by Julius Caesar in his conquest of Gaul, to Genghis Khan, whose war pigeons could carry notes far easier than soldiers on horseback over the rugged landscapes of the Mongol Empire. The pigeon, it seems, has been with us since the very beginning. Like everything else in our changing world, pigeons did not escape the coming of industry. And it's here, in the smog-shrouded skies of Victorian progress, that the origins of pigeon racing as a sport began to emerge. They had been used previously for military purposes, such as in the Siege of Paris in 1870, where their use revitalised the keeping of pigeons for military communication, something soon to be employed in most branches of the armed forces, including the Navy, where a pigeon post could be deployed to carry messages to nearby ships. Back in the civilian world, news agencies, and even government departments were each forming their very own pigeon post services, often carrying the news of sporting results or financial reports. Laws were soon passed to make the killing of messenger pigeons a criminal offence, and with it the registration of all birds became mandatory. After all, in the 1870s the pigeon post was a booming industry all in itself, and one could employ such a service to carry a message as far as Paris from the city of London. It was also around this time when pigeons began to be used for a very different purpose, as the advent of railways could see them transported for longer distances than ever from their homes, all to be let free in the unison of the liberated wing, taking to the skies and instantly making for the distant horizon of home. It's widely believed that this practice originated in Belgium, with the first long-distance pigeon race taking place in the year 1818. The sport was an instant success, with almost every village soon creating its own official pigeon fanciers club, the origin of the social clubs I saw myself as a child. The pigeon was now not only a friend or carrier of messages, but a sporting icon in a new world which continued to grow with every passing year. By 1881, the first races took place in Britain from Penzance to London, and over in Belgium the Grand Concours National was held, a huge race of over 470 miles from Toulouse to Brussels. 5 years following this, the status of the pigeon was elevated even higher, when the British royal family were given a stock of racing pigeons to breed from King Leopold II of Belgium, cementing the idea of pigeon racing as a worthwhile and regal sport in the minds of the masses. In villages all around the country, fascinated amateurs would begin to erect lofts and breed pigeons, forming their very own social clubs in village halls and country pubs. The largest of these is the National Flying Club, still in operation today, and the only one to carry a royal connection. In fact, until her death in 2022, the club had none other than Queen Elizabeth II as their patron, the late Queen herself a lover of the pigeon, even winning her own pigeon race in the year 1990. Even today, the National Flying Club still proudly displays its royal association, with birds being released to mark jubilees and other important royal events, often from outside the gates of Sandringham, where the Royal Pigeon Loft was first constructed. Of course, the pigeon racing world I knew was very different to that of royalty or national clubs, but there was still something of a mystery about its customs and traditions, and it's only when I look back on them that I can realise how strange and singular, how deeply ingrained in its own history this world really was, and still is. There might have been nothing regal about those lofts and smoky social clubs, but there was still a royalty there in a way, a sense of pride and accomplishment, even love. So, how does pigeon racing work? How can you even tell one pigeon from another? In its earliest days, coloured paint was used to mark out and identify the racing birds. And from the late 19th century, and once more originating in Belgium, the brass pigeon ring was developed. It's a kind of small leg band, especially for pigeons, and if you wanted to bring up a bird to race, this band must be permanently attached around its leg, from only about a week old. These bands contain unique numbers, which show who owns what bird, where it came from, and often a telephone number as well, in case of a missing pigeon's case. I can remember on more than one occasion the phone ringing, and a fancier from the other side of the country would have found one of our birds, which had not returned after the last race. In cases like these, the bird would be sent back with a service called Amtrak. Once, a pigeon of my dad's had become trapped in the chimney of somebody's house, and they actually had to take out a part of their wall in order to free it. This black, soot-covered bird then making its way back to our little loft, all thanks to the identification on its ring. These brass rings, though, don't come alone. There's another type of ring as well, the more commonly known rubber ring. Once again printed with numbers, but this time removable and designed especially for the pigeon fancying world. Before the race, these rings are added to the bird's legs and the serial numbers are written down. The idea is that when the bird returns home from the race, the keeper removes the rubber ring and places it into a metal thimble, which is then sealed away and time-stamped in the strange, mechanical world of the pigeon clock. These specially crafted clocks were the lifeblood of the pigeon racers. And after the birds had got their rings and were loaded into the lorry, ready to be taken to the race, the clocks would need to be set and sealed. I can remember this as a very serious part of the pre-race meetings, and there had to be no speaking or moving around. It was all hushed, and they would meet in a room with their clocks, hands poised on the mechanism on top, and the club leader would begin a countdown, and at its end, they would all start the mechanisms in complete unison. If somebody did it just a second too late, they would all have to redo the entire thing, much to the annoyance of the club leader. I can recall now that silence, the anticipation, and the loud clunk of all these clocks being set into motion at the exact same moment, like something had shifted in space and time, and the race was on. As for the clocks themselves, closely guarded by their proud owners, they are, in many ways, mechanical marvels. The ones I can remember had mostly metal bodies, and were first developed during the 1960s. But the earliest ones had smooth wooden finishes, and were hugely expensive even then. These clocks first started in 1885, designed by Emery van der Bosch, once again of Belgium, and they replaced the earlier use of pocket watches, which were open to misuse by competitive racers. Even so, these clocks were not accepted into the British racing world for the first 20 years of their existence. And in fact, it was not until the year 1900 when British pigeon fanciers begrudgingly adopted the use of clocks, by which time they were already in use all over Europe. Inside these clocks was a paper wheel and a mechanical carousel, with individual holes for thimbles to fit inside. Therefore, when the bird arrived home, it would be a mad rush to get hold of it, remove the ring, put it into a thimble, and click it down inside the clock, finally creating a timestamp on the paper inside, which could later be recorded at another meeting, and the winner could be decided. In more recent years, this old mechanical clock has largely been replaced with more modern methods of pigeon timing, including the use of advanced RFID tags instead of rubber rings, and digital antennas on lofts attached to a modern clock, automatically scanning and recording the time the bird arrives home, without the fancier even needing to be there. They even have GPS signals attached to their tags, allowing the passage of the bird to be read from home, like a kind of pigeon sat-nav. This was not the world I saw growing up. Ours was old-fashioned to the very core, and I'm thankful for it. The pigeon lofts were often homemade, appearing like little wooden labyrinths to my childhood mind, with nooks and corners filled with all manner of pigeons and feeding stations. They were all proud of their birds, treating them like champion racehorses. Sometimes, the biggest and most powerful ones would almost be feared by some of the other fanciers, who would fiercely compete against one another and even sometimes develop rivalries. To my 1990s childhood vision, they were like a kind of rural Pokemon trainer, each wanting to be the very best, training and breeding their birds for bigger competitions, with clunking clocks instead of Pokeballs. It was a battle of the pigeons. Gotta race 'em all. Despite this rivalry, however, there was always a great sense of community in these pigeon racing circles. From the very earliest days, these flying clubs often sprang up around village populations, and the fanciers would meet not just to race and compete, but as a kind of social occasion in itself. A chance to get away from the labour of farm and field, to retreat to the warmth of the pub and its fireside comforts, where friends would greet you with a common interest and a genuine connection, allowing for a moment or two the burdens of the day to be lulled into a gentle sleep. I can remember vividly these Pigeon Club dinners, annual events which for many there would make up the highlight of their entire year. There would be dancing and live music well into the night, and copious amounts of sandwiches, buffets, and honest home-cooked local food. Then there were the sales and auctions, more serious events where the birds would be bought and sold for the purposes of breeding. Here, the chance arose for those farmyard Pokemon masters to evolve and level up their racing stock, to move on to the bigger races and challenge their personal best. I went to one of these events as a child, and I can't remember much about the prices achieved or the type of birds that were there. My memory was more focused on sitting on the edge of the stage in this smoky old working man's club, eating a huge pie and peas supper, home cooked by the club owner's wife that very afternoon. But it was still clear to me, even then, that the community spirit was really what brought them together, something far more important than the birds or the races, the results. But even so, despite this community spirit, the pigeon racing world can still be a serious affair for many involved, and the British Homing World Show was formed in 1972 with the aim of showing off these champion birds of the racing world, as well as forming a market and convention for pigeon lovers, merchants, and even artists. It was a big success, and it was forced to move to a bigger premises, where it became known as the Royal Pigeon Association Show, held at the glorious Winter Gardens in Blackpool. It's still today the biggest pigeon show anywhere in the world, and attracts over 25,000 visitors at its annual 2-day event. I never saw anything quite as extravagant as these Blackpool shows when I was a child, but our pigeon club did once visit the Doncaster show, and the club hired a small minibus to take us all there and back again. There was passion in the aisles there, and the poetry of the pigeon was displayed with arts and crafts galore, as well as fancy feeders and advanced gadgets imported from all over the world, with stallholders eager to show us how it all worked. The art was a long-running thing, of course. From as early as the 1920s, pigeon fanciers would call upon artists to depict their winning birds on canvas, with two of the biggest names being Edward Henry Windred and Andrew Beer, whose art fetches quite a premium price today. Really, it's all a matter of pride. The people at these shows were clearly united, brought together by the sight of wings descending from the heavens, down into their small gardens and ramshackle lofts, their feathered racers always finding their way back home, even from far-flung corners of the country, and sometimes even, on rare occasions, over the sea from France. So, how do they do it? How can it be that a pigeon, transported to France in a wagon and let free, can find its way back, not just to dear old England, but to the exact spot of where it was born and raised, a tiny wooden loft in a back garden, hidden away somewhere in the Shires? After all, many people can't even find their way to their local town anymore without a sat-nav or a detailed map. This is one of the great mysteries of the racing pigeon. They are let free, and they return home. But what happens in between? Pigeons return home in a remarkably short period of time, and can do so from incredible distances, even from over 1,000 miles away from their lofts, and all while travelling at over 50 miles an hour in all manner of wind and weather conditions. This behaviour is wonderful, and yet also strange. And despite many years of study and experiment into pigeon behaviour, nobody knows how this extraordinary ability actually works. Many theories have come and gone, such as that of Floriano Papi in the 1970s, who believed that the birds used their olfactory senses to learn the odours of atmospheric gases under different wind conditions at their home lofts, and when displaced, they could compare the local odours and wind directions with patterns they knew from home. This theory was a hard sell, however. Other theories are far stranger, and propose that the birds may be attuned to the Earth's magnetic fields, with some suggesting that iron-rich particles in their beaks may allow them to detect these subtle energies, and, in the words of David Dickman, a neuroscientist at Baylor College of Medicine in Houston, use their brain cells to signal the direction, intensity, and polarity of the Earth's magnetic field, which could be used like a kind of GPS. Other ideas are stranger still. A theory first suggested in the 1960s, and later popularised by geophysicist Jonathan T. Hagstrom, was that pigeons may be attuned to infrasound, low-frequency sound waves of less than 20 Hz, inaudible to us. This type of sound, which is generated by natural events, and is thought to be used by whales to communicate over hundreds of miles in the deep ocean, may be somehow audible to the pigeon's senses. According to Hagstrom, infrasound can be propagated thousands of miles through the Earth's surface and atmosphere, like an acoustic map radiating from topographic and natural features. Could the pigeons be listening for this low-frequency rumble from their loft area, the unique vibration of their home, calling out to them in a synchronicity of senses and sound? Hagstrom even developed a complex computer system to model these atmospheric conditions for days when a body of racing pigeons had failed to come home from 3 separate areas. On each day, his model indicated that infrasound created an acoustic shadow during this time, so that the sound cue was no longer audible to the birds in flight. He believed that not only did this explain the failure, but suggested that infrasound may be responsible for homing ability in itself. But what about the iron-rich neurons and the magnetic GPS? Recently, researchers discovered that the beak cells aren't actually neurons at all, but are instead macrophages, white blood cells concerned with the bird's immune system, seemingly throwing the previous favourite theory off balance. What is clear is that, despite our alleged progress, our claims of understanding the universe and how it all fits together, we are still unable to understand homing pigeons, to reach an agreement on how, as I've seen myself, they're able to find their way back home from so very far away. And even the popular theories hint at a deeper mystery. Birds, sensing the magnetism of the earth, are tuning in to the subtle vibrations of their homemade wooden lofts hundreds of miles away from their current position. It doesn't sound that different from the ley lines and energy pathways of the mystical world. The idea of the earth itself as a living thing, with channels running through it, just like our own veins, leading back to the space of the heart. Whatever the truth, the humble pigeon, it seems, is still able to outsmart and perplex us, to force us to look at the wider picture of how much we know, or rather, how much we don't know about how our amazing natural universe works. Today, pigeon racing is in decline. In the 1980s, there were over 60,000 members of the Royal Pigeon Racing Association, but today it is barely 20,000, and, at least on the face of it, these numbers continue to decline with every passing year. Just like with the pigeons' behaviour, nobody really knows why this is so. The usual suspects have all been blamed, of course. Home entertainment, and the laziness induced by a digital world which rewards isolation and removes us from nature. Some have also suggested that the loss of the traditional social clubs, the places where those old dinner dances were held, may have hastened the sport's decline, and even its visibility. That sense of community and camaraderie really was something very special. And when those old clubs closed their doors, becoming instead franchised pubs, or blocks of flats, or trendy bistros with digital menus, the sense of community was gone. As I found myself when talking about this time of my own childhood, if you didn't go to these places and become involved in whatever way you could, you probably wouldn't even know that this world existed in the first place. Despite this, there are some signs that the decline in pigeon fancying is levelling off, and many are indeed still drawn to this obscure world, like the thousands who still come each and every year to the flagship event in Blackpool. After all, it's only 20 years into our utopian digital future, and many of us are already sick of it, and can see the cracks beginning to show. The world has grown cold, and we are restless, bored of its isolating sterility, its dead-eyed robots, and false promises. We yearn to return to a vanished yesterday, to reconnect with our love of nature, animals, and all of the splendours that come with spending time with them, of living amongst them. The pigeon loft may yet return to our gardens, bringing with it a new generation of racers and winners, and a sense of community that is well overdue a return to our world. And who knows? As the servers which host our fragile digital world are switched off, as one day they inevitably will be, will the old dinner dances return as well? The get-togethers and weekly meetings? And what of the old clubs themselves, and their laughter and contentment that they so easily bring? If I was to try and explain the appeal of pigeon racing though, the spirit that drew in those people who I saw growing up, I could not paint it any better than Dave Sudbury in his wonderful folk song, The King of Rome. It's the true story of a champion pigeon winning a 1,000-mile race from Italy in 1913, setting what was at the time a new long-distance record. This song, to me, shows all of the emotion and wonder of the pigeon racing world. It was written in 1988, and in 2013 it was featured as part of a radio show to commemorate 100 years since the famous bird arrived home at its Derbyshire loft, showing that, despite the passage of years, the progress, the rises and falls of cultures and fashions, the simple pigeon can still manage to attract us and fascinate us. And as long as we share the open skies above us with them, they will be there, our companions, our messengers, our friends.
In the West End of Derby there lived a working man. He said, I can't fly, but me pigeons can. And when I set them free, well, it's just like a part of me gets lifted up on shining wings. Charlie Hudson's pigeon loft was down the yard of a rented house in Brook Street where life was hard. Ah, but Charlie had a dream, and in 1913 Charlie bred himself a pigeon that would make his dreams come true. There was gonna be a champions race from Italy, and we got out the maps, all that land and sea. We said, Charlie, you'll lose that bird. Ah, but Charlie never heard. He put him in a basket and sent him off to Rome. On the day of the big race the storm blew in, and 1,000 birds were swept away and never seen again. We said, Charlie, we told you so. Surely by now you know, when you're living in the West End of Derby, there ain't many dreams come true. He said, yeah, I know, but I had to try, 'cause a man can crawl around or he can learn to fly. And when you live round here, well, the ground seems awful near, and sometimes I just need a little lift from victory. So we were off down the pub for a pint or two, when I saw a wing flash up in the blue. I said, Charlie, it's the King of Rome, come back to his West End home. Come outside quick, he's perched upon your roof. And Charlie came outside. He said, come on down, Your Majesty. I knew that you would make it back to me. Come on down, my lovely one. You made my dreams come true. In the West End of Derby there lived a working man, and he said, I can't fly, but me pigeons can. And when I set them free, well, it's just like a part of me gets lifted up on shine.